Brian at Paradise Arcade. Welcome to another riveting YouTube installment. Tonight I'm going to be going over LED buttons. We started selling these as our major product line about just over a year ago, and we evolved about 18 months ago to a year ago. We went through several different manufacturers and settled in on the buttons you see here on your left and my right, and we wanted to share what we learned in that process. What we've done lately is bought a couple of buttons from competitors whose names I won't mention. Many of the competitors that we bought buttons from are getting similar style buttons and treating them differently, but I'm going to go over some of the differences tonight so that you can understand what the differences are and you can make the decision on your own as to what you want. We feel that our buttons are superior for a number of reasons that I'll go over. So first off, let's just cover the light and what goes inside the button. So you start with the holder here. And if I pull the holder out of our red button and take a standard holder from a competitor's button, if you hold these at similar heights, you'll notice something here, and that's that the white is higher. And the white is the competitor's lamp holder that goes inside the button. So what that does is that puts the lamp closer to the button surface. The other thing that you'll notice if I hold up the red and the blue here is you'll notice that the blue button is actually shorter than the red. Now that's nicer for a shallow control panel, but LEDs work on a simple principle of dispersion. So most LEDs have relatively directed light. It forms a cone. So if the cone looks like this, and the cone is coming up from your LED, what will happen is, if your button is, say, the width of this line here, then you're going to get a spot in the middle of the button, because the light isn't going to disperse all the way across the surface of the button. And so what you'll do is if the button is shorter, like the competition's buttons that I showed you, and the LED is held closer to the surface, then you get a short distance here between the LED and the button, and that means you end up with a spot on the surface. We are actually very specific about our buttons, and our buttons are chosen such that the dispersion ends up actually displacing the light evenly across the entire surface. This was really important to us because we didn't like seeing little spots in the buttons. We wanted to see a nice even glowing effect. So that's the first thing that I'll attempt to show here. Let me just get some power up here. Welcome back to our light and color adjusted video. If I leave the settings of the camera on at the normal settings, it just completely washes out the picture. So what I wanted to show here are two things. On this side here you have our button. On this side here you have one of the competition's buttons. Now what you see here, I've adjusted this so that you can clearly see the light across the top of the buttons. If you look at this button, remember we said it was shorter, it was going to be earlier, and the cone was going to be shorter, so you're going to have less even dispersion across the surface, and you can see that there with this bright intense middle and then a fading ring going out. And that's what happens when you put the LED too close to the surface. Now the other thing that some of the competitors are doing, and I don't understand why you do this aside from buying 5,000 white LEDs will keep your costs down, but they're putting white LEDs in some of the colored buttons. Now a white LED and a yellow button looks good because the color change to the human eye isn't too big a deal, but if you look at this, you're really getting a washed out button. This button here on your left is a much richer blue, whereas this is not an illusion or anything. You're kind of seeing a washed out color here. I wanted to show the difference here between the two buttons in another color. And in this case, you have both buttons are actually with the same color LED inside. But again, here you see this intense cone in the middle, and if I push, you can see the cone grows, which is what you'd expect. Whereas on our button on this side, you actually see a nice even dispersion of light. Now, around the edges of the button here, unlike the previous one where the color washed out, you saw that in the blue, when I put the same color bulb in, so this is red and red, you actually see a nice color. And if you were here, the intensity in the middle is bright, but it's still red. It doesn't get that washed out white appearance. Now, you can even see in our buttons, if you push, you get a little bit of that whiteness in the middle because you're moving down the cone. Whereas on this one, you can see that intensity really grows. And that all has to do with dispersion and placement. And that's really important when you're selecting LED buttons because you want your control panel to look nice and even all the way over it. I wanted to actually take a chance to show you an interesting feature that we have is we have our brights or our ultra brights. These are what's called an SMD, or surface mounted diode chip. They're a lot shorter, so you get an even dispersion. As you can see here across the whole thing, it's nice and even. You have a little bit of edge at the edge of the plastic that shows up because it's a thicker plastic, but it's a much brighter, probably about 2 times the intensity of the other bulb. So if you're looking for something that is brighter, you're looking for something to show off, or if you're using an LED controller and you want to be able to dim and brighten some of your LEDs, this is a great choice. It'll offer you a lot of range and flexibility. So this is in our buttons. This is actually another thing. So our 5 and 12 volt bright LEDs don't fit in the other buttons because the inside barrel is too small. So you actually have to pick up our buttons in order to be able to use these. We have 12 volt DC and 5 volt AC DC. Both the 12 volt and the 5 volt of the super brights are the same exact intensity. So how can you tell the difference between these on sites? Are we the only person in the world that carries these wonderful high dispersion lights and buttons? No, we're not. And we actually haven't found any other companies that do so far, but they are not exclusive to us. And 1 or 2 companies refuse to send us products for us to look at. So, despite them having ordered from us, but that's okay. Some things you can look for. If you look at the side here, what I want you to look at, I'll grab a pen here and just a point. So I'm going to take the nut back a little bit. There's this washer, and you want to pay particular attention to this washer. It seems like a very minor thing, but you can see how thin it is. It's probably only about 3 millimeters thick, whereas the washers on the higher quality buttons, if you notice, they're actually substantially thicker. Um, there is a disadvantage to that. If you put these on a 24 millimeter control panel, the button's going to sit up the height of this washer. So if you do want a 24 millimeter hole for this to go into, these competitors' buttons are actually going to sit down closer to the control panel. The downside is the light isn't going to look nearly as nice. Another thing that we noticed early on, with the help, unfortunately, of a friend of ours, is that the competitors, or sorry, some of the other light fixtures, they're hard to snap into the holders. Now, in some cases, that's good, and in some cases, there it's kind of hard to twist in. In some cases, that's bad, and the reason that that's bad is these are actually made of a more brittle plastic. So you can see the wings pop off pretty easily there, whereas the plastic on ours is actually quite strong. You can see it bends all the way across there. I mean, I'm actually practically touching this piece to the other side of the button and it doesn't break. They fasten in, they're stiff, but they're not hard to get in. So they're nice and firm and they lock in place. Let me show you a couple more things here. To pop the buttons apart, you just squeeze the bottoms. So this is the bottom of one of our buttons. And so I want you to look here at these. This is the competition button. I'll try and put some contrast in the background for you. So if you look at this, what you'll see is that these tongs here are actually skinnier than these tongs here, meaning that the surface pushing your micro switch is a lot smaller. You also look, I was talking about the hole for the light. The hole for the light on the red one, which is the competition, is much smaller than the hole on the green. The plastic is a little bit more translucent on the red, but it doesn't matter because your light's actually shining up the middle. So if you have any questions, please let us know. We're always happy to answer them. I apologize for the lack of quality in this video. We tried to do this with a webcam this time. We don't have the tripod for our nicer camera. But I think you got an idea of what some of the differences are. The key things that you have to remember are the light dispersion. The bottom plastic pieces actually break quite easily on some of the more brittle plastics. Ours are much stronger. And then you have this option of your brighter light. So if you're going to use controllers, you can actually have something that you can dim or brighten and have some control over it. We do have an RGB LED for our lights. I don't have that out for display here, but I'm happy to make a video in the near future. So if you have any questions, please contact us. It's sales@paradisearcadeshop.com or brian@paradisearcadeshop.com. Thanks for putting up with me again tonight. And again, this was just to go over our LED buttons. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.